So, hi everybody, welcome back to Beyond the Facade podcast. This is Doña Junta from Swami Chronicles, and today we'll be interviewing a special guest. I did want to put a side note that Sabrina is just offered today's podcast. She'll be back on the next one. So she just had some things that she had to take care of, and she has to get some new equipment. So she'll be back though on the next podcast. So it's just going to be me today. And I did have a special guest. Her name is Catherine Hernandez, and she's an actual architect. So that was really exciting. And the reason I found out about her was through a mutual friend. His name is Eric Huerta. I know him as Random Hero just because we used to blog, and he has a podcast called Orale Boyo Heights. And I heard her podcast on there, which was a really long one too, with Catherine. And she shared her story of being a both Latina architect. So that was really inspiring. So I'd like to welcome Catherine.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure to join people who come from similar backgrounds. So thank you for having me.
Yeah. So what is, I guess now in present time, like what's your title? I guess is it architect, or I don't know, like, and I will ask about like the different types of architect. What is like kind of like your job,
so I do practice architecture. That is like my 9 to 5 full time. But most of my work comes from community engagement.
Okay.
So I lead. I'm seen as like a community designer, community architect, right? And that's kind of like my title or role. I think formally I'm a director.
Okay.
But yeah, so I work for a nonprofit, and they specifically focus on housing justice. And I
Yes.
lead a department where we look at different sectors of housing. So that looks like permanent housing, transitional housing, affordable housing. So that's kind of like the bread and butter of my 9 to 5. I was born and raised in South LA, so South Central Los Angeles. Both my parents are immigrants from Central America, and that's where they landed. Actually, they migrated. I think actually my dad, when he first came, he landed in South Central, and my mom in Maywood. So just through their, relationship, they ended up staying in South Central, and that's where I spent the rest of my life. My parents actually still live there. We're not homeowners, so that's kind of also an important piece of like our story, right? We lived, or I grew up in an apartment complex. And
Apartamentos.
apartamentos, yeah, with all the kids, with the
Yes.
patio at the front. So I grew up in an apartment complex in South Central LA.
So I love to know which part of South Central, like between what streets, what section.
Yeah, so between Manchester and Century and on Hoover. So that's south, yeah.
So below the 110, right? Or is it above? Or I don't know. How would you describe it?
Adjacent to the 110, and I would say north of the 105 freeway.
Okay, so you're close to the 105. Is there any kind of district name for that area? Because you know how there's some central, South Central has some district areas or like some sections.
Yeah, we're District 8, so Council District 8.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so it's District 8, and I think it's also known as like Westmont, Vermont,
Okay.
Knowles. Yeah.
There you go. Because there was always like some like name attached to it, like that's like, oh, how did this come up? So
Yeah.
as far as the name. So what was the pathway to architecture when you were a kid? I mean, when you were a kid, did you like buildings? Were you like already like kind of knowing that you wanted to do that? Were your parents any part of this when you were little?
I think, actually, it's funny you asked that because I think being in so many white spaces, the story I always hear is like I always enjoy playing with Legos.
Oh yeah.
and that's not my story at all. Like
Yeah.
I didn't even have Legos growing up.
Right, they're expensive.
Yeah, they were so expensive. Like no way. I think for me, actually, it started. My mom was a community organizer.
Oh, nice.
So she was a community organizer in South LA for a nonprofit that did some substance abuse, but they also did a lot of community justice work.
Okay.
And so growing up, I grew up in kind of like nonprofit sectors, you can say, right? Going to a lot of events. And one of the most important campaigns or the most impactful campaigns was that my mom worked on was the shutdown of liquor stores in South LA.
Okay.
And that came about because there was research conducted at the time to figure out, why was there so much substance abuse in our neighborhoods. And then they did a study comparing District 8 and districts on the west side, or not even districts, actually, like cities, right? So Santa Monica City, west of LA, like Brentwood areas. And they saw how liquor stores actually were only about in a mile and a half radius from each other. And in South LA, it was every 3 to 4 blocks, which is
Oh, wow.
like a big difference. So I think I didn't really understand how did that translate into a career necessarily, right? I think probably our generation grew up in like being wanting to be a career girl, right? And so I didn't understand that. Like I wasn't in those
Right.
conversations, and I think that my mom was involved in so many campaigns and events that were around social justice and land use. So I think because of that, as a result, I was trying to understand that I liked it and I enjoyed it and I knew that it was
Hmm.
empowering, but I didn't know what that translated to. I didn't know that you could be an architect or an
Right.
engineer. Um, I think even while I was in school, I learned about other fields like you could be a toy designer and things like that. And like I had no idea. I was also the first person to go to college,
Right.
so I didn't have many also in my surrounding, in my immediate community to tell me like what that field was. But I think it came through that. It came through my mother's work and also growing up in a nonprofit that did a lot of social justice work around land use and also community empowerment that I really wanted to pursue architecture, or I learned about architecture. Um, I think also just seeing that this investment in my district that even continues to happen today. So, I think something I grew up in, like many other people, is just walking to school, right? And
Yes.
whether it was, elementary or middle school and high school, I walked to all three. And there were so many vacant lots everywhere. And I
Right.
think going from second grade to seventh grade and the lot is still vacant. If you start asking questions like, or I was curious, like, oh, is there a store coming or are they building housing? Like, do you know what's happening? And um, I think through those questions, it seemed like I had interest in urban planning, possibly,
Right.
and then I didn't know what urban planning was.
Right.
And then I think I was very fortunate to have connected with someone who was in higher academia and was a working professional, right? And um, kind of guided me through that route. Like it sounds like you're interested in architecture. And then I started looking into it, and that's how I started pursuing the field.
But that's awesome that your mom was inspo too, that she was already involved in her own, social justice. That's very cool that she was had that passion in the community already.
Yeah, yeah. I think my mom has a lot of drive. She's inspiring so many ways. I tell her, I didn't grow up playing with Legos, and have access to a lot of, I didn't have access to a lot of things that are tied to wealth, right? And I think I learned a lot of skills with my mom cooking. She sold food, so she wasn't necessarily a street vendor, but she sold things to like tire shops, and people knew that she sold food. And my mom was very detail oriented in a sense that everything had to be diced the same size.
Oh my
And
God,
there's
yeah.
there's like if you had a chile, it had to be cut like at an angle, and if it wasn't cut correctly, my mom would make me cut it all over again. And so I think, and then my mom also worked making piñatas. So it was something
Ah,
that we did at home, not as a family event, but it was just, we were all trying to help my mom make these piñatas, right? And there's a lot of craftsmanship that comes with that.
yeah,
And
yeah.
then, and on like, just throughout time, I think I realized now as an adult that I learned a lot of like my model making skills and like a lot of the skills that you need for architecture through just my mom's side hustles, right?
Right.
Whether they were picando fruta or making meals or making decorations for quinceañeras and making piñatas. That I think my creativeness, that's where it came from. So Yeah, my mom has a lot of that.
Yeah, that sounds cool. She's so active. She was so active.
Girl, she still is.
Yeah. She still has her projects going, huh?
Yeah.
No, that's so cool. So as far as so somebody that decides to study architecture, like what does that entail? Because I know that obviously designing a building, but I know there's like way more to it. Like in brief, like what do you like if you say I'm an architect, what types of things you could do? And you already mentioned some like your plan, do other things. So just for people that don't know, what would you say?
Yeah. So I think, well, okay. Well, when you become a licensed architect, there's a whole, I think, a big system that needs to be redesigned for people to pursue architecture. I think I'd like to say that first, right? Because I think
Yes.
it's inaccessible in so many ways, and I feel very lucky that just all these odd things kind of align for me to be there, right? But I also work my ass off, quote unquote, right?
Of
Like to be
course,
there as
yeah.
well. To go to architecture school, first of all, there like one of the most important thing is to make sure that it's not only accredited like as a general college, but also has the department as an architecture department has this accreditation called NAB and NAAB. And if it has that, then it's a 5-year program, right? And then you have a bachelor's of architecture. And then
A
there are
what?
other
Sorry.
a bachelor's of science in architecture,
Okay.
or a bachelor's or a BA, just a bachelor's of arts in architecture. And there are a lot of colleges that have architecture majors, but they're not accredited. So then when you try to become licensed, it's kind of
So you
disregard
got to
your
be
education.
mindful of that.
Yeah.
And who
So
tells
like,
you that, right? If you don't
yeah, who
know,
does?
right?
Yeah, who does? And then, I think if you're someone who doesn't have someone who graduated college or someone who pursued architecture, and it's your first time applying, like it's something so easy to miss because you don't know what you're looking for. So that's the first thing. And then after you graduate, there's a requirement like a lot of people who get licenses, whether you're a lawyer or a doctor, right? There's a series of exams that you have to take in order to
I remember you said that with
call
Eric,
yourself.
and I think it was like 7 or 8 exams or something, like
Yeah.
ridiculous.
So
Like,
I think a few years ago it was 8 exams and an interview. So you can
wow.
imagine that, and also for a white space, an interview can be, I don't know, positive or negative, right? Like mostly negative if you're a person of color, if they don't want you to access the industry. But
Yeah.
so then now it's only actually 5 exams. So
Okay.
you take 5 national exams, and this is what everyone throughout the whole country is taking. And then after you take those 5 exams, then you take your state exam, and it varies state by state what that exam looks like. So even before you qualify to take those exams, you have to accumulate a total of like 500 hours. Every like 2 years, it varies. They change the amount of hours, but and the hours, what they do is they try to set you up for success. And I quote unquote this again because I don't really believe that's true. Um, so each division is a different expertise. So one division of an exam is, for example, how to run a firm, right? So it's everything about the business of architecture. How do you manage clients? How do you calculate hours? So very kind of dull and boring business oriented exam. And then there's another exam where it's about like building code, right? What happens if someone with a wheelchair needs to access a commercial building? How do you calculate for parking? How do you, access, or how do you build an HVAC system to a 25-story building, and things like
Mhm.
that. So they vary in focus, but then before you qualify, you also have to have these hours from whatever job or internship you're in,
Right.
and that can take. I think that's the part that sometimes takes people years to get those hours. It took me, I think, actually 4 years, three and a half or 4 years to get those hours.
And
And
this is post graduating, right?
this is post
You're not
graduation.
even gaining them while in. Okay.
No, and while you're doing all of this, you cannot call yourself an architect because it's illegal. It took me 3.5 years to have my hours and then start taking the exams. And then to start taking the exam, sometimes even what you learn doesn't translate directly to the exam.
Oh my
So
God.
yeah, so then you're buying study material that costs for each section a book costs like $500. So you imagine, and then to take the exam itself is 270 now or 250.
Yeah.
And then you only get one chance, right? And then
How long is exam?
they're on average they're about 4 hours, four
Yeah,
to five
that's
hours.
so wild. That's
Yeah,
crazy.
and then when you get your results, it's just a pass or fail. They don't tell you which section or anything like that. So it's kind of you're going blindsided, right? Like you're
Right.
just hoping for the best or hope that you studied enough. And then then you have your hours. Well, first you have the degree, right? That it's accredited. Then you have your hours, and
Which
then
is
now
3 to 4 years and then
yeah,
takes exams.
and then you
Okay.
take the exams. And then, I think for a lot of the conversation is not for a lot of women. That could take years if you're a mother. I think for people of color, right? Whether you're Black, Indigenous, Latinx, or Asian, right? That maybe it's not as accessible because of money, right? Like you don't get paid enough in the industry to also have side money to take each exam.
Right. Right.
Um, and I think with the pandemic, what we saw also was a lot of people who are a lot of BIPOC folks, right, didn't take exams because they were paying for their family who were passing, who were essential workers, or I think my a lot of my story is my grandma is going through cancer, so
Mm.
in order to best support her, I am kind of like the financial person in my family to be able to share that money with them. And I put a whole exam on hold because for me it's more important to support my family than to take an exam, right?
Right.
So I'll get back to it once I'm there again. But and I think that's not it's a very universal story within people of color, right?
And
How
you're
we're
noticing that trend now that you're in it.
yeah, and I think even so then there was actually research conducted because there was a big issue within the industry of how many you know people of color are entering the industry. And something
Right.
I have shared is, for African American women, they make less than 2% of all of US licensed architects. For Latinx women, that number is actually a little bit lower. I believe it's 1%. and
Yes.
and so it's there's actually an ongoing list of, for example, a directory, you can say, of women in in the industry, so that way they can find each other and we can know about each other, but also empower other young people to enter the field. And I think also just trying to create community because there's a lot of harassment that comes from being a 1% or a 2% in an industry where it's very white male dominated.
Yeah, I could definitely imagine that. I mean, even like when I was younger, I wanted to be a archivist, like in library archivist.
Mm-hmm.
But even back then, I would say like, no, I think only like there's only like one white guy in a library that has that job. So I like just didn't do it because it just seemed impossible. Like I didn't really know the details and I didn't probably think I could at the time.
Yeah.
But then I did learn in library science, it's mostly white women, like, which is good that it's women, but it's more like it was always for elite people.
Right.
And it's now changing, but it wasn't attainable in a sense for everybody
Yeah.
else, you know?
Yeah. And I think, I don't think that women being the minority in architecture is very unique. Like I think there are a lot of fields where women in general are the
Yeah.
percentage where they take up less, right? But also, I think there's also even a lower amount of women of color who are entering those spaces, and there for many reasons. I think I've also part of that study also showed how many people drop out in their field from pursuing a license and the stories behind that. And some of the people I've met is they took the MCAT and got their license to pursue a medical field because that was easier for them than an architecture license
Wow,
because
that's
it's only
crazy.
one exam and we have five exams. And I think
Yeah.
something they shared was, when you are doing an apprentice, I'm not sure actually what the right term is, but like an apprenticeship with a doctor, it's like you're directly working under them, and what you're learning with them during that period, then that's exactly what's on the exam.
Yeah,
And
like you're a resident and
your
you're being
residence, exactly.
supervised. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
And I that actually doesn't happen in architecture, and there is no system of accountability where, you know, where you can report to the state board that actually um, you worked 35 hours and your supervisor only checked off for 15. There's nowhere, there isn't a system of accountability where you can go and report that and have some justice, behind the work that you've um, been part of. So I think that's a big
Mm.
flaw, because
Hmm.
there's a lot of gatekeeping, and I, yeah, it's just very problematic in many ways.
So just to backtrack a little bit, in high school, did you do anything that started the architecture step, or did you decide in college?
No, I did. I did in high school. So I went to my local high school, which is Fremont High in South LA, and um, and then I was there for a year. And I while I was there, I was in a, I think it was a magnet in math, science, and technology, or something like that, like a STEM related magnet. And someone there had recommended my mom a school that had an architecture program,
Okay.
um, because they knew that I was interested in that. I did a lot of robotics when I was in high school,
Oh.
and so then my mom applied for a magnet program in the Valley, and so I was actually bussed out to go to school in Granada Hills.
You
And
hear that a lot with the busing out of the kids from South Central LA to
yeah,
the Valley.
yeah, to the
That's a
Valley.
whole
And
nother topic,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. And I mean, to make the story short, yeah. So I woke up at 5:50 a.m. every day, 10th through 12th grade, and I attended the school in Granada Hills, which I had no idea. I mean, to me, Granada Hills, I was like, where's that? I didn't. The furthest my family would drive out to was HP, Huntington Park,
Yeah.
and and most of our life was in the metro. So going to a whole different part of LA County was just mind-boggling for myself and my family because they didn't even know how to get there themselves. So I was bussed out there, and then I was part of this magnet program that had an architecture course for a period of 3 years. And so once you commit to that course, it's an elective, and each year it takes on different skills of architecture. So you start with like designing a tour bus for an artist of your choice, right?
Okay.
And that's like a fun creative project, and it's like a semester long project. And then I think the second year is like you design a house, and then the last year is like you design a building. And they're teaching you this in a very like LAUSD old school underfunded way, where
Is it
you're
like not computers on paper?
not computers. You're drafting like you're in the 80s or 70s, before computers. You're
I
drafting.
never knew like drafting class was part of that because there used to be drafting class when I was in
Yeah.
middle school.
Yeah. So
I
there
had
was
no idea.
there was the whole thing is all 3 years they were drafting. So you have like a T-square, a ruler, you're getting your set of pencils. And at that time already, the whole profession was on AutoCAD in a computer. So like,
Yeah.
yeah, so I think I did learn some skills that translated to my first year of architecture school, like drafting. And and then they had the teacher who taught that course had an academic club, and that club would compete at different levels, like city, state, and national. And there was a category for architecture, and there was a drafting competition, and there was a model making competition. And I would enter both. And the one I actually competed for nationally was the model making one.
Mhm.
And I think again it goes back to the craftsmanship that I shared with my mom.
Yeah.
So I wasn't going to Blake's or art supply stores because they weren't accessible to me. I didn't know what those were at the moment, but I would go to El Centro and go to all the quinceañera bautismo stores and buy
Oh,
styrofoam there because that's what my mom knew, right? Like that's where she
yeah.
was like, oh yes, let's go to Michael's or let's go to the Seventh and Maple to get these arts and craft things. So here I am with a glue gun, a picado, So I think it was about being creative. I think I was creative in a very poor way, and I have no shame in that because I think that is relatable to a lot of people, where you're trying to find your way in and how to be creative with what you have and yeah, that's how I did a lot. I mean, it took me to nationals, right? So I was doing something right, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, after I took that 3 year course, then I started. I almost actually missed the deadline to apply to college because I didn't know, um, what the process really was, and then because I was being bussed out there, I didn't have time to stay after school with a counselor, so that made it harder. Um, and then I think it was maybe a couple of weeks before the deadline, I learned I had to have a portfolio to submit to architecture school. And if I didn't have that portfolio, that would mean that I would have to either miss the deadline and transfer, or I did something very fast and just kind of hope to God that I would get in.
So you
And
go straight to architecture school from high school?
yeah, so I did. I went,
Okay.
yeah, so I went to an architecture program
And
right
that's like
after
you
high
said the
school.
5 years. So from there, 5 years.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and I think when we talk about like the accessibility, it could go back to like education not at the college level, but even education through LAUSD, right?
Right.
Because if you have students who are creative people, whether it's photography, digital design, communications, they require you to submit a portfolio. And if you're going to a school that doesn't know how to support you in that way, then you're not really
Yeah.
pursuing a field for yourself. So I think I was very lucky in that way, that I was in the magnet program. I was able to have these pieces. I didn't know what a portfolio was, but I just kind of put it in a little scrapbook kind of way, the only way I knew how to make a
Mm-hmm.
portfolio. And then I got in. So I think that was um relieving for me, and I think I was very happy. I think actually going to college wasn't a dread for me at all. It was something that I dreamt of growing up. You see all these movies that they sell you this American story about
Right.
going to school, right? And I think I really wanted to be part of that because I knew what it would mean for my family.
And you went to
And
Cal Poly or where
no,
did you
so
go?
so I went to Otis College of Art and Design. So
Okay.
it's a private it's near LAX actually.
Yeah, it used to be by MacArthur Park.
Yeah, I
The
remember.
old school one. I have a friend
Yeah,
that graduated from there, but he was still when it was in the hood right there in MacArthur Park.
yeah.
It has a
It
long history there.
Yeah, I remember the story is it was actually Otis and Pratt were one school. Something happened and then they split, and then Otis moved from New York, so from the East Coast to the West Coast, was in MacArthur Park, and then had multiple like satellite buildings, I would say, throughout LA. There even
Yeah.
was a building in downtown at some point. And now they're I think all of the full campus is actually at LAX. So all of the majors and satellites moved to that area.
So I didn't know they had an architecture program. That's cool.
Yeah. So they
Nice.
have a program that's architecture, landscape, and interior design. And
Okay.
you touch all three as you progress through every year.
Got it. I remember you in the interview that you got into detail about architecture school. It's pretty intense. Like it's pretty hard,
Yeah,
right? You
it
have to be
is.
like on it.
Yeah, I think it's intense for many reasons. It it does fill your whole schedule to have like 20 units, which I think is beyond.
That
But
is a lot.
like I
Yeah.
think it's usually 18, and they encourage you to keep it at 18 or under. Yeah, I think I had 20 the whole every year, and
Right.
it's you have the most important course is your studio course, and that's where you develop all these projects that are either semester long or sometimes longer. So the studio course, and it's about a 5 hour studio course, obviously, and it is hard, but it's also fun, and it allows you to understand and build community with your classmates, because then they become someone who you're with the next 4 to 5 years,
Right.
and you're sharing the studio space with them, so the studio really does become your home. And then I think even if you Google like architecture studio, you'll see some fun pictures where not only it looks like a mess, first of all, right? Because everyone is at different phases of their project, and there's model making material all over. But you spend so much time there that people start building their beds under the desk. They bring a whole microwave. I remember my studio, we all pitched in for a couch, like what is it, a futon when you fold out a bed, and we had that in a microwave because we were always
Always in
there.
there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that it's also hard because I think it goes back to the question, who gets to decide what good design is, right? And you can create, I think, as a student, right, something. I mean, maybe in the 50s, right, or in the 60s, as a student, you can create something that is oriented with like social services, right, which is what I do now, housing with social services, and how that create a healthy environment for people. But maybe that was too radical for people in the 60s or 70s going to architecture school, especially when you have an all white panel who think like this is not going to work out. This is not a great design. And you get a bad crit, right?
Right.
So who I think that's problematic in itself, right? When there's people who cannot relate to why you're creating this work, um, and or even try to understand it. And I think for that reason, it makes it hard, because there aren't people like yourself who have that same understanding.
Right.
And then I think the second one is the reason why it's also hard is because all of this takes a lot of money. You're not only
Yes.
paying,
I
you're
remember you
not,
said
yeah,
that.
you're not paying only for your tuition. You're also paying, you know, your computer, and then the software that comes with the computer, whether it's Illustrator, then and then 3D modeling, whether it's with Rhino, Grasshopper, Maya. All of this takes money, and it's like it's never, oh, it's less than $100.
No.
It's all
I would
like
imagine.
in the $1,000 range,
Oh my
and
goodness.
then you're staying up all night drawing and designing, which is fun. I'm not gonna say like all of it is hell, because it's not,
Yeah.
right? So it's like you're drawing and designing. All of your, what do you call, your peers are there with you. You're sharing space. You're sometimes at some point even sharing food together and being exposed to different cultures. And then you have to print, and you have to build your model. That also takes money, right? So I think printing for every midterm and final, it was maybe for myself, 200 to $300. And when
Mm.
you're a student, I don't know, for me, it was a lot. Like, I didn't have
Yeah.
$300 just to print things, you know?
Hmm.
And, and then to build a model, then I learned, oh, there's, specialty art stores where they have styrofoam, and there's basil, and wood, and this type of glue. And I was trying to have the best model too, and compete with my colleagues. I think all of that takes money.
Of
So I think
course.
it's hard for those reasons, because it's inaccessible in so many ways, and it just takes. I think a lot of people who end up dropping out, it's because of just how much money it takes, and they can't afford it. Um, I think for me, I worked 2 jobs, at some point even 3, and I was always like sleep deprived,
Oh wow.
going to class. And I also worked, even as I was hired at school to be staff, and everybody knew that I was closing out like the print store, which was open 24 hours, and then going to class right after at 7 a.m.
Oh,
And
geez.
that I say that because it's not, they're not words of encouragement for anyone, but I think they're more, there's a lot of work to do to be able to break those barriers for people not to have to do that all over again, because it's not healthy and it's not sustainable.
Just curious, from what you know, has architecture school kind of always been like that? Or was it easier in the old days as compared to now?
No, from what I've heard and I've learned, it's it's always been like that, but it's also always been romanticized. That,
Yes.
romanticized in the sense that you're here because, yes, this is what architecture is. It's like a very, I think the title itself, when people think architect, they
It's
think of this
prestige.
prestigious, yeah,
Yes,
prestige and
exactly.
class, right? There's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
class and like socioeconomic mobility. I don't have any of that, I don't. And I think architecture school if we go way back, it was predominantly men, right?
Right.
And and they, if you could think about it, right, it was probably a lot like, what do you call their man cave, or something similar to that sense, because it was all men and they're all talking about how art and design, right, it impacts people's lives, or they're trying to, they're designing, or maybe they're not even thinking that critically. And
Right.
then as time has developed, that studio culture is the reason why the workforce is so unhealthy, because they're trying to recreate that, right, in the professional world, without thinking about um, workers' rights. What creates a healthy environment? How are you not harassing your employees? How are you awarding them? Are you giving them a living wage? All of that is dismissive because the studio culture is so romantic that they want to keep that.
That's
And
interesting.
yeah, so
Mm.
I think, to me, I've seen that directly because I used to work for a studio where we worked like 12 to 14-hour days every day, and we were all on salary. And so when I would see my paycheck, I was like, oh, I'm only getting paid like $15 an hour at the end of the day, because I'm here so much of the time and I'm not wasting
Mm-hmm.
time. I'm working throughout the time. But to keep you there, they offer you things like there's a happy hour from 6 to 7. So you're
Oh,
like
wow.
drinking, you're like on the clock, and there's happy hour, but you're working.
Wow.
And then, the next day, if you really just worked every day for 16, 14 hours because you're trying to meet a deadline, then they try to even cater food for you, right? So it goes back to that studio culture of keeping you there, and you're just
Mm-hmm.
going home real quick for a shower and coming back. And I think now people are having more of those conversations of how to create healthy environments. And also, I think with COVID, when people went online, it made it hard for people who were in power or leadership to really control what their employees were doing, right? So it's like all of that studio culture was gone.
Part of the Beyond the Facade is just interviewing people that are in the same type of world, niche, history, architecture, and on Instagram and social media. And I do know now that your Instagram is private, right?
Yeah, it is.
So is it a personal one, or is it one that people could add you to, like, know what's going
Yeah,
on?
they can add me. I think, I go back and forth on whether it's a personal or not. And then I think I try not to post so many pictures of like my family and what
Yeah,
I'm doing
I got two
privately,
because of
yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think I struggle with that. But yes, if someone is a request and I see that it's a real profile, I'll add them on. So if there's anyone who listens in.
So I always do research on people's Instagrams. So I did a PowerPoint and I picked out like 13 of 13, 14 of your photos. There's a ton, but I wanted to kind of, like, I was curious about these particular ones. And I did see you started around 2012 on there, but it did look really personal in the beginning. And then later on, you started posting more of like what you're doing now with the other projects and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So yes, we stalked your Instagram. So I'm going
That's
to share
totally
the
fine.
screen.
Go ahead.
This old picture from 2012. You posted the Bradbury Building because it's a kind of everybody loves this building, right?
Yeah.
So tell me about like why did you post this in 2012? Was it like because this is like kind of I guess a popular one. So
Yeah.
tell me what was your take on this one at this
Uh,
time in your life?
at this time, well, I actually, you know what? Thank you for doing this. This is very cool. It's insightful to just. I know that obviously
Reminisce.
it's on my phone, but yes, now that you bring it up, I actually worked in the Bradbury Building.
Cool.
So I worked for a lighting design firm there, and I think I didn't like what I was doing, but I liked the building and I enjoyed being in that building, and being able to like walk around it, go up the elevator. Um, I think it was also the very first time where I had to enter an elevator and someone else was pressing the button. So that was a very unique experience. So yeah, so I took that picture because I was working at the Bradbury Building.
Oh, nice.
So I was trying to enjoy the moment while I was there.
Okay, so another thing that I don't know, we think we'll mention it. So you mentioned you went back and forth from personal to kind of wanting people on your page. So hood architect, were you always hood architect from the beginning, or did that change? Did you change your name with time? Just give us a little reason for the hood architect. What's your take on that?
Yeah, so it wasn't hood architect until people started calling me that without me knowing it.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
So I think it actually I don't know. I think my name was something playful with my actual the Catherine name.
Uh-huh.
I can't remember what it was. And then I think a year or two into me having an Instagram profile, because I was posting about architecture, um, and because people knew that I was finishing architecture school and doing community engagement work in my community, they called me that, and I didn't know it. And then someone said, "You should just change your name on Instagram and make it that." So
I love
it. I did it, and then I felt awkward, and I thought it was cheesy, and I felt like maybe there's some narcissism that comes behind it, but
no,
I just
it's
took ownership of
perfect. It's perfect. Okay, so the next one, this is a video you posted in 2015 of the back alleys of South Central, and there was like some folks doing music. Tell me about this scenario. Do you remember this video?
Yeah, it's that alley still looks the same.
I love it.
And it's the back alley to the apartment complex where I grew up in.
So you mentioned you're from Guatemala and then Belize, right, or something like that?
Yes.
So what is it part of? Like, is there like a Belizean community? Because it looked like there were some people singing and some music there. Yeah. Tell me about that.
So there used to be. South Central has historically been a Black community.
Yeah.
And when I was growing up in South LA, all of my neighbors were predominantly African American, and I had 3 neighbors that were Belizean.
Okay.
And so I think I don't know. I don't think I knew how to identify either, right? But I think there was just a lot of Black community in South Central.
Right.
Now, my dad still lives there, so when I go back, actually, all of his neighbors are Latinx and predominantly Mexican. So that culture has changed a lot. But the group was actually Panamanian.
Okay, yeah.
The one that's playing in this video, and they had this group that would practice every Thursday and Friday, and this alley has been so underinvested in for so many years. Like, it looks like you're in a whole different
country or something.
Yes, and it's still that way. And there's a lot of crime that has happened there because there's no lighting. Just there, it's like there's tierra, there's dirt everywhere.
It's straight raw. Yeah. And I mean, I love the grimy. But I see why it's an issue too, because it's never got invested in. It's like, yeah. Wow.
But then you have beautiful moments like this where right, because you're not necessarily worried about creating privacy. You have access to your neighbors, and So they knew it was like people put chairs outside and they would listen out to the music. And this was something that I would come home to every Thursday and Friday when I would go over to my parents.
Yeah. So just for people listening to describe it, it's a video of pretty much like a dirt alley behind her house, her old house. And then there's like a garage or something that's in the back right there or something, right?
Yeah.
Like, and then there's a group of people, music, and it did sound like Caribbean or Central American or something like that. I wasn't sure, but they're just vibing right there, like, you know. So I don't know. When I seen that, I'm like, oh, I like this.
Yeah. There's a lot of like intersectionality of, I guess, sharing culture, and I
Yeah,
think that's fun. I think that's also a very unique experience of living in the hood in an apartment complex is you're forced to get to know your neighbors. You have no
right.
choice, whether it's to fight for parking or to actually borrow some sugar.
Right. Okay, so the next one is another video that I was curious about. It's 2017, and you said, I'll read it for people that can't see it. Other than working on the design, permitting, and construction of this small house, also finally got to finish up this video working with a 1920s house in Atwater Village. So it was like a remodel in addition to transform the look and feel of the house to maximum space. So I really thought this house was super cute. Like, I mean, it's probably Atwater is probably expensive, the area, whatever. But the way you guys tell me like your role in this, like
Yeah.
this
So
house. Plus, it's
I work.
1920, so yeah.
Yeah. So this, yes, 2017, Atwater was already going up in housing prices. So it was an
Mm-hmm.
expensive house. I would also say it also, the owners were two, working professionals with degrees and some economic mobility. So let's start there, right? Like that's a big mark.
So they could
And
hire you guys, right?
yeah. So they
Yeah.
could hire an architect, right? And so I wasn't. This wasn't work done by myself. I think I always try to mention that architecture is not a one person project. There's usually a
Teamwork.
team of people.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't want to take credit for all of it, but this was a so they bought a 1920s home, and it was a craftsman style,
Mm-hmm.
and this couple were having children, so they wanted to expand their home to be able to have more rooms, but also create a more modern style of this 1920s home. So my role was project management and design in this project, and I worked for a very unique firm where they did a lot of small residential work, which is how I got my hours, because I
Okay.
was able to touch the project from the beginning to end. And that's very hard to do when you enter like a big corporate firm. And so it started with creating initial contact with the owner and going to design meetings, hearing what their vision was and what their overall objective or vision was for their home and how they wanted to navigate their space. And based on that, then we basically gutted the whole house. A
Oh,
contractor, right? The whole house was
right.
gutted, and then we were also the construction manager. So that meant actually there was no general contractor. My role was to hire different subcontractors, so different trades, and organize them as inspections were coming up, which is
Okay.
actually not very traditional to happen in
No.
architecture.
Okay.
You usually hire a GC and they take care of that, right? So in this role, we played both. We were like both the GC and the architect. And it was a big learning experience for myself because I was playing both hats. And I was also learning from my supervisor just what that would entail. So this home ended up being, I think, actually a 3 bedroom home, with a living room that opened to the kitchen and a patio area. So it really tried to break away from the traditional craftsmanship and even preserving anything that the house had that design interior on the interiors. So
So
there
they
was a
took
lot.
that out. They gutted all that. That.
All of
What
it,
about the
yeah.
outside?
Even the I think the only thing that stayed was the roof shape.
Man, there's
And
pros and cons to that, right? Like, oh,
yeah, I think
it's like
it's
pros and
personal
cons.
taste,
Yeah.
you know.
Like
There
goodbye
were
craftsman, like,
Yeah.
oh.
So all of the windows, they usually craftsman windows have a lot of details in them. They have an exterior wood framing. All of that was gone. There were skylights installed throughout the whole house. We even did a modern kind of design where how a lot of buildings now have exposed wood on the inside where you can see the actual roof and things like that, like the roof components. So a piece of the house has that where it's exposed from the beginning, but then at the end it's all drywalled. So yeah, that's where that picture is from.
So just quickly, it's easier for them just to gut a house rather than starting from the ground up
Yes,
because there's
it's
already like a frame of some sort. Okay.
yeah, it's usually more affordable unless, of course, you have termite all over the existing wood frame. Then yeah,
Because
then
then you got to do foundations and all that
yeah,
stuff. Yeah, that
yeah,
makes sense. It's just, I mean, it was really cute. I liked it. I definitely love the house, but it's just, I guess when is it 1920s now anymore, right? Would it be
mm,
considered still 1920s?
it's
Maybe
yeah, the
the
style.
skeleton of
Yeah, the
it.
style is not, but usually by like if the city looks at it on record because they keep all the records
Right, right.
I think, well, you know this, right?
Yeah.
So the first record you pulled, it's a 1920s home. Just it would say it's 1920s, like contemporary. It's no longer craftsman, because all of the craftsman details are gone.
Okay. So they'll still state the year 1920s. It won't be like, okay, remodeled in 2020 or 2017 or anything. Okay.
No. Mhm.
Got it. So let's go to the next one. So this one was interesting because obviously we know the what's going on in LA with so much, you know, uh people that are homeless, right? There it's increased over the past 10 years. And so I know that now it makes sense that you do the work in addition to your architecture, does the community work. So are you keeping up with what's going on as far as some of these issues, like these deaths of people that are,
Yeah.
obviously they're dying. Just for people that are listening, she put a graph of LA coroner counted 918 people who died while homeless last year, a 76% rise over the past 5 years. So what is your take on some of this issues with the homelessness? Obviously we need more homes or more places for people to live. But what do you think your take on this? Like seeing some of these statistics.
Well, it's devastating, to think, to just put a number and to be dismissive of how many people are dying. I think people see this, like, you see this graph and you just think of, oh wow, 618 or 76 or 900 without thinking what that looks like, when we start putting bodies, right? And
Right.
so I think um, it's devastating, but I also feel like there are many um, problems and systems that need to be fixed in order to create a system where everybody has a home. I stand in the housing for all, you know, political side of things, where I
Yeah.
really believe that housing solutions should be provided for everybody. Where I also don't believe that um, some of the transitional buildings or centers that are created for homeless folks are healthy. Um, so looking at sometimes these communities that have, these storage sheds that are popping out everywhere in our city
Tiny
now.
villages, right?
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Where it's yes, it's transitional, and it is helping people out of the streets, but also I think when there has to be a middle ground where we need to find a healthier way to house people. Um, Also, I think it's very late. There's so many things that we could talk for an hour
So many
about this.
layers about
Yeah,
this.
there's so many
Yes.
layers. I think I feel conflicted in so many ways also because it's personal. This is also what I do on a daily basis, and um, sometimes there are people who are very detached from this work and are in this sector who are
Mm-hmm.
creating housing solutions, and they are in it for the money. I want to say that.
Yeah.
They're in it because they're not necessarily thinking about what it will mean for people and how they're creating solutions or how to create the best design, but they're in it because they see an opportunity and they want to take it. And it's tough. It's tough.
Yeah, I work in mental health, and our clients always come in asking for housing, and it's a little bit I feel like I feel helpless because we can't just put them into a Section 8 or anything like that. Like we're so limited. Like we only are able to provide linkage to a shelter bed, like maybe a 3-month shelter bed at Bell Shelter or something. Or if they do have a little bit of income, maybe link them to share housing where they share bedrooms with other people. Because it's a little, it's $500, $600 to share a room, which is still sometimes really hard for some people because they have GR and GR might be only $200. So then there's so many limitations. And I know with the pandemic, there was, the Project Turnkey and emergency Section 8s and all that, but
Yeah.
that's still been, and then I think the bridge housing came where they put these big tents. I don't know if you've seen that.
Yes.
So they did, and they got the hotels and stuff like that, but it seems like I don't know. It's hard. Those answers are hard.
It is. Look, honestly, I think it's hard for me to, I think, so I do this, for work, like for my 9 to 5, right? And so I think I do care about these statistics and I do care about what they mean for people, because these people are my neighbor, right? The people who end up in this population of homelessness are predominantly African American, then Latinx, and then they're also from underserved communities like South Central, right? And so they all, not all, but the majority of them end up on Skid Row for many issues that can be fixed at a very early stage, right? That could look like LAUSD having a counselor in school, because these issues, quote unquote, start at, they are a result of violence, right? Whether it's a mental health issue, or they can be a result of crime, of family trauma, of domestic violence that you're experiencing as a child, right? So I think it starts with services, like at the very beginning, right? Whether that looks like services at school or services offered to the community. And then what does that look like for communities? When I think about communities, like it's almost inaccessible for people of color to have mental health resources as a community, right? So whether that's breaking the stigma of seeing a therapist or breaking the stigma of men having healing circles, of breaking the stigma of, of so many things that are around social services that could create solutions to close this gap. And then I think after that is the building, the actual building. I think the root of the problem is services, right? And how funding is distributed to provide services to communities, and then how that then translates to housing. I think for me, I've worked in architecture in different sectors where I built, $1 million homes for a family of 4. And that was unrelatable for me when I was going back to South Central to my apartment with my parents, a little 2-bedroom with 5 or 6 people,
Right.
So I think also when I think about my family, even today, yes, I work in this profession, but I know that if my dad doesn't have a paycheck, he could be homeless the next month.
Right. Yeah.
So
exactly.
This is not far from home either. So I think that's why, to me, I'm very passionate about this work, and also being mindful, because I know I'm not the only one in this work, and there are a lot of people on the ground leading it. So I think from this post, all I can say is, or not all I can say, but from this post, I can say that the best thing we can do is support organizations like Los Angeles Community Action Network, LA CAN, which is a nonprofit org that does a lot of advocacy and organizing around housing issues and housing justice. So if there's anything to take away from this podcast or from anything that I have to say, is that, yeah, I think we have to make a better effort to connect with organizations that are leading this work and that support people
Yeah,
in our
definitely
community.
send me the links to all of them, and I'll link them under your, your episode for sure, so people could also check that out. Any of the ones you feel passionate about that regard, this type of work.
Absolutely, I will do.
Yes. Okay. So this next one, I was interested in seeing this one because NOMA. So there is actually an organization that kind of is highlighting and wanting to support minorities. When did this start, and was it because of the fact that there's not many minorities in architecture? Tell me a little bit about this organization.
Yeah, so NOMA, it stands for the National Organization of Minority Architects. And it was actually started by 13 men in here in the U.S. who
Okay.
were of African. I want to say not even African American. I want to say Black, because I don't know if they come from different diasporas.
Okay.
But it started during the civil rights movement, so in the 50s. And
oh, wow.
Yeah, so it started with 13 men, and they're they were in the profession, but again, they were in the 50s. So one story that I particularly remember from one of the founders,
Sorry.
yeah, no worries, is that he had to learn how to draw upside down because as a Black person, he wasn't allowed to sit next to a white client.
Oh, wow.
So in order for him to design and show the client sketches, they had to learn how to draw upside down because of segregation. So that's how NOMA started. There's 13 founders. There's actually a whole history. So if you look at the NOMA website, and I encourage people to do so if you're interested in architecture.
So are you part of that, or do you have to be part of it?
Somehow? Yeah, so I am part of it. So it starts as a college. What would you call them? Like a club.
Okay.
So we have different chapters at architecture school. And so we have one in Cal Poly, USC, UCLA. We have one at ELAC, and we also have one, let's see, where Otis. And so there are a couple of architecture schools here in Southern California that I can think of. And the organization has different missions, right? For developing professionals like myself, there's workshops on networking, on how to create your own business. If you're a senior practitioner, it could be like how to land bigger projects. If you're someone who's at an intern level, a recent grad, we are creating this mentorship program to kind of partner you one-on-one with working professionals, so that way they can guide you through and make sure that you're not experiencing any type of harassment, or talk about how to have a pay increase. And then we also have programs like the summer camp. And the summer camp is called Project Pipeline. And it's directly because we're trying to create a pipeline where we're having more students from underserved community enter the profession, but not necessarily pushing to enter architecture, because the summer camp teaches architecture, engineering, urban planning, and design. So we're touching on all four during this camp. And sometimes students don't pursue the architecture field, right? Sometimes they actually find that they have an interest in digital media because they learn how to use or they learn how to make buildings at the summer camps, and now all of a sudden they want to create video games, right? Which is great. And I think, to me, I see that as a program succeeding, even if we're not having another architect entering the profession. So that's what, and then we also have a boot camp, and the boot camp is for high school students. And this is a year-long, I would call it's a year-long program. And I'm not sure that boot camp is the right word because there's so much negative, that comes from boot camp. But it teaches students how to create a portfolio, right? How do you develop work? And there's little mini projects that they do, so that way they develop portfolio pieces as well. And then at the end of the boot camp, we offer a full scholarship to go to SciArc and do a summer program there to get you
Okay.
in, so you that way you're in a college space and getting that experience and exposure, but also having access to talking to the counselor or the financial aid person at SciArc if that's where you're interested to attend, and then prepare you to apply for an architecture program once you're ready. The chapters at schools, they have support from professionals who are in the field, like myself, chapter by chapter.
Okay.
So sometimes that looks like mentorship. Sometimes that looks like, you know, recently I've had a student who emailed me who just wanted to talk over coffee because they were going through a very stressful moment and they didn't know if architecture was for them, right? So sometimes it's just honestly just talking it through, right? And being as supportive as possible. So I think NOMA in itself was how I found community in the
Okay.
profession, and it's also how I think I was able to pass my exams because they provide a lot of support um, through that because they know that people of color, you know, just whether we have financial access or not, we just need that additional support. And I think through that collaboration, there came a lot of support of providing studying materials, also having study groups. Um, and so, yeah, so that's what NOMA does. I think on a national level, you know, we there's a conference that happens every year. I sit on the board for the next 2 years. So I'm actually a board member of the NOMA SoCal chapter.
Oh, nice. So
So
pretty active in it still.
yeah, so
Cool.
pretty active, yeah.
Okay. And okay, so let's move to the next one. So I picked these two. The first one on the left side, it was in 2020 when you mentioned Dr. Ben Carson nomination for housing and urban development. Because I know that was I felt the same way when I seen that he was nominated. But it also reminded me of because you broke down the history of the housing development, how it started in the 30s, or just like the whole redlining and everything like that you brought up, which is that's probably a whole episode in itself. But it reminded me of a post that I when I was in school for grad school, there was a discussion that there was on the Pruitt Igloo public housing project in let me see in St. Louis. I don't know if you ever seen that.
I haven't.
It was I'll send you the post later because there's a documentary on it. But it was like basically projects that they created for people that were obviously low income, people of color, mostly Black, and they started as these exciting, you know, projects that look like very like these 20-story buildings that were like I don't know. To me, it looks like eerie just looking at all these the structure of it. It was very prison like.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, it was exciting at first for the people we could afford an apartment and there's a playground and there's all these families, but it was like a disaster because little by little they just deteriorated and nobody really gave a fuck. It just went downhill and there started being basically just tore them down and that's it. And now and there were empty lots for many years and it's just started a big issue, but it started because there was like you know during the early days when they started building all the projects even in LA, like these solution to housing I guess or whatever
Yeah.
they were thinking at the time, which sounds good, but then it came later on with they just kind of made it like a prison. I mean
Right.
it's just so much to that, right? So I don't know. I just thought that this was interesting. How you said about, and I didn't even know if that person is still they're not secretary of housing anymore, right?
No, they're not. No,
Who is
but
it now, or is
actually, that's
I
a good
have no
question.
idea. I should know probably, but I don't know. But I wonder if whoever it is now is if it's helping or is made any changes.
Yeah, so I don't know if they have made any changes. Her name is Marcia Fudge. I'm not sure if I'm
Okay.
saying her Marcia Fudge. I I know that there's a federal um like federal funding actually to create housing solutions because actually there was a study that was done nationally of how many people lost housing during COVID. So I guess that's positive, you know. I think anyone other than Ben Carson who has a field of expertise in the sector is a better nomination and a better seat for them. So I don't want to say like I don't have a relationship to Marcy. You know, obviously
Yeah, I mean,
the
we don't.
new the new HUD secretary,
Right.
you know. But I know that there are positive things coming out of the office. So one of the things that I recently saw was that, and it's actually something that the org that I work for is currently getting funded for. So there's funding to create housing solutions for people who lost housing during COVID, and it's very specific actually because there's a demographic actually of seniors who lost housing during COVID.
Right.
Seniors who were in community care facilities. So a lot of people, I think there were over 500 sites in LA County that shut down during COVID. And if these sites have 5 to 20 people, and we're seeing 500 of them close down, that's a big population of people that now no longer have housing. So this funding is for that, is to invest in the centers that didn't close, but also in centers that are in a financial crisis, so they don't close, and we're providing them funding to either remodel or invest in the current building, so that way they can create not only stay in business but also create more housing solutions. I think going back to the redlining comment, yeah, redlining has been and still currently is problematic. It's the reason why zoning like exists, right? So I think there's actually a lot of bills, Senate bills that are being drafted and are tentative towards actually California specifically, where they're trying to remove some of these zoning restrictions. So I think one of the very early one was even the debate of having an ADU, right, an accessory dwelling unit, or the granny flat, or also known as the garage conversion. And there was, I think that was drafted for many years and it wasn't approved. And now it finally is legal. And it's a step towards, I don't think it's a step towards housing solutions necessarily, but I think it's a step towards like rewriting the narrative of zoning. We're in a city where there's a lot of single family homes. And because they're restricted to only being single family homes, it creates a problem where we can't build multiple units and then we can't house people, right? And that is a direct result of redlining. I think also a direct result of redlining is seeing communities like South LA that allow for businesses like liquor stores to be at every 3 to 4 blocks, right? Or also seeing that allowing for only apartment complexes to be built on certain lots, right? And then you end up cramping up so many people that it's not healthy. It doesn't create a healthy environment because they don't have access to a grocery store, they don't have access to a park that create a healthy community.
Yeah, and create, like you mentioned here, creation of the Black Ghetto, like how over the years it developed into that because of all these
all
type
these
of
barriers.
literal barriers almost. So yeah, I thought that was interesting. So hopefully there's more changes now with this nominate whoever it is now. So this next photo or picture you posted was I guess when we first started COVID, well, and we were working from home, you made a couple of like, what do you call this? Like sketches.
Yeah.
And this is like of something you're working on, or like your space, or what were you?
No, so this was actually seeing so this was before actually I actually moved. So from being in a studio space to being to in a 1 bedroom, and also seeing my family went through a transition of homes, and seeing how they use the space. And I think because for so many people during COVID, we saw they were bread, like, the baking, right? And now we have time to do all these free things, right? Oh, I'm gonna make home renovations, and I think I was seeing that a lot on social media, and maybe it's my algorithm, right? But I think there was this just general universal conversation of having um, this big black and white disparity, where either you were experiencing COVID and it was directly impacting you, and this whole other group of people who were like, I have time to work out, let me get my Peloton, I got this workout set, I'm baking, and I'm remodeling my home, and I'm taking a
Mm-hmm.
nap, and I think I was only seeing that online, but the people I knew were the other side. And that even meant like my family. So for example, I'll tell you this, my grandma, my mom, and my two sisters all lived together in a studio apartment. And it was my grandmother's studio apartment that is considered senior housing, right?
Okay.
And so my youngest sister, is in elementary school, and there is no dedicated space for her to log into her Zoom and take a class. So this sketch kind of was just like a study of just how us as people were just navigating our space and how we were making it work. And the way my family was making it work is my sister was actually taking her Zoom class in the restroom, sitting in a toilet with a little foldable table, because it was
Oh
only the
yeah. Wow.
quiet
Yeah.
space. It was the
Mm-hmm.
quiet space for her to take this class. Um,
Right.
and meanwhile, online, I'm seeing like a whole different world, and that is
Right.
it's not relatable to me or to the people I know. So I think it was just the sketches were a series of that, of how we were using space, how are we navigating, how it's impactful. This one has a balcony, um, and I didn't have a balcony, but I was like, if I did have a balcony, I would make a better use of it, right? And I lived in an apartment complex that didn't have a balcony, so it felt very overwhelming to be inside, to feel almost like you're in a shoebox, right? And I don't think I think at some moment even I saw people comparing it to I feel like I'm in prison, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, well, that feeling is actually not even comparable, because you're allowed to leave your house. You can go out to the park and take a walk. Um, so yeah, I think it was just more of an insight look into what my community was doing and what I was doing to make our space work, but also how we share space. I think also growing up, I shared an apartment, like a one-bedroom apartment, with a lot of family members, and how we just make use of that, right? Like, I think in our Latinx culture in general, like two bunk beds right across from each other will make it work.
Yeah.
There's a little desk in the hallway before you go into the bathroom, and that's whoever's going to college in your household. That's their dedicated workspace. And
Right.
you don't and then you close all the doors, because they're typing loud as hell 1 a.m. in the morning, and that was
Yeah.
me. That was me. So I think those sketches just spoke to that flexibility, and making what you got work for
Got
yourself.
it. Yeah. No, I thought that was interesting. Okay, so we'll move along. Sorry, I'm taking probably more of your time, but
No, 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 it's fine.
okay, so this was really profound. So the what we're looking at here is a post that she put, Unmaking Architecture, an anti-racist architecture manifesto. So is this an actual manifesto of something? And then the words here was part of that, or did you tell me a little bit about this?
Yeah, so this manifesto was actually written by a colleague, and I want to give him his name is Cruz Garcia, and he's a
Cruz
yeah,
Garcia?
Cruz
Okay, Cruz
Garcia,
Garcia. Okay.
and he's a Puerto Rican architect, and he has his own firm or group. It's called Way Think Tank, so WAI Think Tank, with his partner. Um, and so I think the collaboration is called Garcia Frankowski. That's his partner's last name. And so during COVID, they actually came with this anti-racist manifesto, and it was I think it was a manifesto to look at architecture in many ways, right, that are unspoken in the profession, and how to unlearn, and how do they respond to political foundations. So I think I would want to encourage people to read it because it's very thorough. And I think to me, it just resonated with a lot of the work that I do, and it aligns with the work that I also am part of. So I think while a lot of architecture school, we learn about manifestos, right? And we learn about design manifestos, but they never come from a social justice lens, and they never come from actually a person of color. They're always white. They're always white males, and for that reason, they're problematic because they don't. Their lens is completely different. So I think this was the first time that I had come across someone who was not only working currently in the field, but also aligned with a lot of the conversations that were happening this year in 2020.
Right. So this was profound because since I'm pretty involved with the prison advocacy system, it reminded me of I don't know if you heard of Foucault, Michel Foucault.
Yeah.
He wrote Crime and Punishment, I believe, and he talked
Yeah.
about the prison, how that's structured, and that reminds me of the way he talked about the structure of the prison, like Pelican Bay, the way it was intentionally designed so you won't have any privacy, and
Right.
it's basically for confinement, solitary confinement. And I always wondered, you know, when I first read that stuff, it was it like, are the architects like happy doing this? I mean, like designing this, like, or do they not care because they're just getting paid? I mean, I just wondered, like, if they matter to them.
Yeah.
Maybe it did, maybe it didn't, but it seemed probably like they're just doing their job and they're not even thinking about what they're building.
Yeah. I think like any um like anything in the world, people have their biases, right? And sometimes that bias comes out in the work that they do. Um, I think the profession, well, one, the profession itself is very white, but also, so who makes up the majority of this, field, first of all. And I think the fact that there was even a design competition for the wall during Trump's,
Right?
presidency,
Yeah.
to me was insane. Like, and then there was a call to action from architects, to not do this, but it's not against the law for you to participate to become an architect and build a wall. Um, or there was even during the Trump presidency, he wanted to preserve um, like classical Renaissance architecture.
Mm-hmm.
So every federal building had to be built under those design guidelines. They had to follow, that same design system.
Even if it was a new building,
Even
they
if it was a
designed
new
it in that
building.
style. Oh,
Yeah.
interesting.
And that was problematic in itself because we knew that that style was meant to keep, like, gatekeep people
Right.
out.
Yeah.
So there was actually a petition for that from a lot, like American Institute of Architects, right, against the White House to like rethink that and not create that a design guideline. Um, but yes, I agree. I think well, actually, one of your first questions was like, what type of architect are you? And I think once you become a licensed architect, you get to choose what kind of architect you're going to become.
Mm-hmm.
So there is not a license where it says you are only your expertise is only in residential work or skyscrapers. It's once you become licensed, you can do it all. You can
Okay.
design
Yeah.
a boat, a casino, a 35-story skyscraper, a museum. Um, so it's you get to choose where you want to go and what you want to do, and then I think by having that option and flexibility, you also get to choose the type of architecture you're going to build. Is it one that is not going? Is it one that is violent and is going to harm communities? Maybe you are
Right.
that. Are you doing that intentionally? I hope not, but I also know that there are a lot of people who don't care enough, you know.
I think
And then
ethically, you're gonna have to choose, I guess, what your beliefs are and your ethics. But yeah.
yeah, so I think this manifesto was just a reflection of how uh, we build spaces and how the impact of building, like the actual impact of buildings in people, right? So I think for myself, I can, if we try to make it very personal, it's like, oh, there was for sure an impact of me growing in an apartment complex that had barbed wire at the top of the entry gate, you know. There is a difference for someone who has a lush green front yard and has no bars on their window, right? How do they navigate space, right? How do you navigate space when you've always had access to a park across the street from your home? That is so different. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's probably so much to talk about with all these things, right? I mean, we could always do a part 2 and have a discussion. Okay, so this one, you mentioned that there's very little women already. So I like how you brought up, I guess these are all the names of the women architects or in LA. Is it in
Yeah.
LA or that they built something in LA or they
Yeah.
were part of it?
Yeah. So it's this was an award given to a selection of women in Southern California and
Okay.
in the LA area, and I happen to be one of them. So it's like highlighting women who have done impactful work, and that looked like different things. For me specifically, that impactful work was the renovation of Community Coalition headquarters in South LA. So a nonprofit
Okay.
social
Yeah.
justice.
Yeah, so that's definitely awesome that you guys have that connection with the women. And then you're gonna laugh at this one. Okay,
Yes.
so I was like, I'm with you on this because okay, so what we're looking at is those annoying boxy buildings we see all popping up all over LA. I hate them. They're just plain. They remind me of Home Depot renovations or something. I don't know, but it's a apartment building, and she put ugliest building I ever worked on, and it was in 2020. But
Yes.
it's like, why do they I mean, I know that maybe like the different buildings, the older buildings were probably ugly at one time too. And now these are the ones, but they just don't have character to me. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So this building has, I want to say, 67 units of extremely low income housing units, and
Okay.
they're in South LA. So I was working in my community, and I was working for a nonprofit housing developer, whatever the hell that means, and I felt very, so it's ugly for so many reasons because yes, it's boxy. There's no design. There's no design. I look at this and I'm not proud of it. It's there's no design in it. There's nothing creative that comes with it. It doesn't look like you're trying to create a healthy environment for the people you're
Uh-huh.
trying to house, and it looks like the bare minimum. I think
Yeah, plain.
it also looks like there was no effort with even, let's make it less uplifted by bringing uplifting colors, right? Color really does have a mental health impact on people.
Yeah, true that.
So the colors in the image are gray. The building has three different shades of gray, and they look like sidewalk gray to a very dark gray, and then a bright white, and it's right next to a Carl's Jr., right? Which was funny for that reason too.
Go get your
Um,
fast food after that.
yeah, and so I worked for a nonprofit housing developer for a year, and I was there because I believed in the mission, and I wanted to be part of that work. And then once I was in that studio, I was completely disappointed because they were designing buildings like this, where they weren't very mindful in
Hmm.
creating a healthy space for people. So while you can read the mission on the website, right, and you can hear about their work on social media or on a newsletter, once you're actually in there, like in the trenches and making this collaboration and make this project happen, it's a completely different story.
I would
And
imagine, yeah.
so for me, I was one of two people of color in the whole studio, and I was like problematic for pushing for more creative design in this building. I was just like, it's a like why? And I was like, this is in my district. This is for the people I know. So if we're a nonprofit housing developer saying that we care about people, then we need to care about the design that goes into these buildings too.
Yeah.
So this is the reason why I was only there for a year. So this was like the last thing I touched, and I was like, I also don't want to be part of this because you're being harmful and violent to communities
Yeah.
while advocating or leading right? Because they were seen as one of the leading nonprofit developers.
And they're probably like, oh yeah, we have 60 something units for low income, but it's just that, like, there's nothing, let's use it the bare minimum for
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
Crazy. Okay, so I picked these two as well. One on the left is Clean Up South Central. I thought that was pretty cool that that was happening during COVID, it looks like, because it's 2020.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you're a part of that cleanup organization or you're
No.
helping promote it.
Yeah, I was just helping promote it.
Mhm.
It was this young woman. Her name is Dime Jones, and I think now she has created a nonprofit org, and I think it is called Clean Up South Central, so they can be found through social media. And the intention was to look at the history of the corridor, right? Like the 1992
Yes.
civil unrest and how much disinvestment.
And
Not
65, right? Like those
Yeah,
two things are still like,
very
oh
dominant
man,
of what the
yeah.
community looks like today.
Mm-hmm.
So 65, 92, there are still vacant lots from both civil unrest and the cleanup. The intention was to not only bring out community in solidarity of and awareness, right, of this history, but also clean it up and make it more enhancing, I would say. And I went to two of them, and there was more than, I want to say, 80 people, 80 to, I would say 80 to 100 people who were there. And at the end, it ended on Manchester and Western, which is actually a big corner where people, a lot of food vendors set up on like food trucks and things like that. So at the end of the cleanup, people came out and had food and supported with donations. And I think I'm not 100% sure, but I think she might be doing this on a monthly basis now and trying to expand into different events or leading different conversations as well about both the 1965 and 92 civil unrest. And then next to it, you have the National Call for Design as Protest. Um, Design as Protest is a collective of designers throughout the nation, which I was part of, and I led the policy committee. So the collective, it's architects, designers, engineers, urban planners, and it came it Design as Protest came about during COVID because there were so many issues that we were seeing in intersections of design and the built environment. So it's still up and running. It's really systems of accountability. They have actually 10 demands, and one of them actually is to abolish like prison systems and the design of prison centers. And so the national call was to not only, oh wow, I typed national call, not only bring awareness but also get people to sign up and to have actions and demands within their workplace. And I just want to read to you, I think, one more of these demands.
Okay.
So, so let me see. I think the very first one was to divest and reallocate police funding, right? And I think this became a big conversation during the pandemic, right? Because people had more time to look into what does defunding mean, what can we do about that, and how do we, I think, people question sometimes, well, how does that relate to architecture, or how does that relate to design fields? And it's like, well, everything that we design in the built environment, people take up space, right? So I can design a community center, but then now if this community center, my design and mission was to create a healthy environment and an accessible one, but now you have over 15 cops surrounding it for security, then it's not so welcoming anymore, right? So it does impact design and the built environment. So the 10 demands in themselves are related to the built environment, but also just how to push for more collective cross collaboration between adjacent fields.
Got it. No, that's awesome. So I'm glad that now I could definitely see more of the social justice element in architecture that you're working with. Okay, so the next one is this event that happened in the 1987 Encampment Suite, which doesn't look it looks familiar to everything happening now, but I never knew about this, so I did read about that. So I know the area on Santa Fe where there's an ugly building. I don't know if you guys like it, but it's ugly to me. That long, it looks like a Titanic. I hate that building.
Oh,
It's
yes, yes,
right next to the metro.
yes.
And I was imagining before, because they mentioned that they put this area for homeless people at the time to try to, I guess, camp them out or something. I don't know what at the time, what to try to get them out of Skid Row or something, right?
Right. Yes. So it was, I mean, yes, in so many ways, it is what we're seeing today. I think when I posted this, it was because there were the Stop the Sweeps happening during COVID, when they were cleaning up for specifically Echo Park.
Oh yeah.
And
Hmm.
I think the history of just okay, one, that neighborhood, right, the amount of gentrification that has happened, and then the park was had acquired additional funding for the remodel of the park in itself. And then during COVID, there was this big community that developed in Echo Park of homeless folks, who created, who had multiple tents. And it was just like this whole area of like over 30 tents. Some of them actually had like outdoor spaces where they can cook, and you could, like, if you were walking along the path, you would see how they actually built the tents themselves to have one to be like maybe a living room, the other one to a kitchen, and
Right.
then it wasn't one or two people, it was like a group of people sharing food, right, of homeless folks. So I posted this because the I think a lot of people thought that the sweeps were something new that were happening
Mm-mm.
during COVID,
Yeah.
when historically they have happened throughout time. And then each one more violently under different mayoral,
Right.
candidacy. So yeah, I think this was more of a reflection of, oh, this is just history repeating itself one more time, because the this encampments and the sweeps are not something that we're just seeing during COVID, but they just have historically happened to erase people off, right? And to convince, sometimes even for political capita, people that you're creating housing solutions, and then you're not, you're just sweeping them out, so they're not as visible. Um, so yeah, that's where that this is.
Yeah, and I just connected it in my mind to that area because it's on Santa Fe, and I know where the metro's at. And I remember before those ugly apartments got built, because they're expensive, ugly apartments. I don't know if you
Mhm.
know what I'm talking about.
I don't think I've seen the new apartments.
They've been there probably like it's been probably like 10, 15 years now, but it's the boxy layers
Oh,
of
okay, okay.
apartments, across that whole strip on Santa Fe, right across from the architecture school.
Oh, yes, I know what you're talking about
They're
now.
like
Yes,
red, black, and white. It looks like a Titanic.
yes,
Even though, yeah, it's just not, to me, it's not appealing, but they're expensive. They're not low income or anything, but they're built right in front of blocking the river. So I was imagining what where this encampment was at the time. And I remember before the apartments were built, I remember the metro the metro company being there, and the rest was just like a fence, like it was.
yeah.
And then these apartments came shortly after, but yeah, but you're right. This has been going on for a long time. So it's definitely not new.
No, it's not. And I think it's sometimes the sweeps, they don't happen necessarily because your city council member is making them. Sometimes they happen because you have so many people who, once they see someone, a homeless community in their community, then they are they make it an issue for the city council member, so they actually can have a sleep. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of those NIMBYs, like not in my backyard, and I think with having that perspective, there's um, a lot of the sweeps happening, unfortunately.
Right. So now I'm going to ask you a few questions before we wrap it up. Well, first from Sabrina. She asked, and you mentioned some of this already. Have you received racism, sexism, or differential treatment in your field, in your workspace? And how did you overcome that?
Yeah. Yes, I've experienced all of them, I would say. And I don't think I have overcome. I still experience them. I still experience it today. In my department, I am the only Latina woman. And I think I, I don't think I've overcome them, but I think that I have I feel more empowered and more sure of myself. I think as a young, look, I'll say this, as a young person going into the field that is predominantly white, I grew up in South Central where I didn't see a lot of white people, right? And going to college was the first time that I was around white people. And then now I'm in this profession where there's a lot of people who question, who want to make you feel like to question yourself, right? And I I think there's a lot of violence in that, right? Because there's physical violence that you can experience in the hood, but there's also mental violence and trauma that you can experience at a workplace. And I think I experienced that for a long time. But now I just shake it off. And it does, I don't let it get to me as much because I am sure of myself. And at the end of the day, this is what I do and this is my field of expertise. So I think ownership of the work and my knowledge was a big step for myself. So, and I think with that just came a lot of internal work that I had to do. Yeah.
No, that makes sense for sure. And then also this question doesn't have to even be architect related. It's just your own, I guess. There's no right or wrong or any of this. So as a Latina architect, as a woman, how do you define what makes a house a home?
Okay. As a Latina, I feel like home is where my family is. I think I'm very lucky to have a family that I talk to on a daily basis and that I always want to share space with. When I moved out, I cried a lot because I miss my family. And so I think home is where my family is. And even if we didn't have a physical space to shelter us in, I think wherever they are is where I find home. I think as a woman, home is where I feel safe, right? Where I know that I'm not going to be harassed or my life is in jeopardy or where I don't have to experience sexual violence in any way or violence in general. So I think as a woman, I feel that is home. But I think as a creative person, I can say that home is where I have a dedicated space to be creative and just be able to be myself.
Sounds good. Okay. And then, well, I like to know, what is your favorite vintage architecture? And then she wants to know like your favorite architecture style. So maybe first, if you have a favorite vintage one, because I do like some modern, but and I know the classic has problematics. We could go into that too. But what's your favorite vintage architecture style?
Is there a difference between vintage and just any architecture style?
Well, I think, and me just as a person outside of architecture, I think 1970s and beyond, mid-century and beyond, I would see as more vintage and like the modernism. And I know they probably add some of the elements of vintage, but I guess anything like 70s and beyond. Anything in particular that you like as a favorite or era that you do like?
Yeah, I think I like mid-century modern a lot. And I don't mean this in furniture, just in, I think when you read about manifestos and architectural design from those moments, they're very interesting. I like it because they're interested and I'm curious, not because I think they're amazing or they're powerful. Like there's a big difference, right? Like I'm curious about them and I'm interested in learning about them. I think for me, specifically the mid-century modern here in LA, when the case study houses happened. I didn't know that when I learned about case study houses in school, I learned them as a series of houses that were being developed here in LA. And then when I looked at the history recently, it was actually, they were trying to create a housing solution. In the 70s, like 60s and 70s, creating housing solutions in LA. So mid-century modern, and then I'm intrigued by brutalism. So very heavy concrete architecture.
I hear you on that. And then what would you be your style that you like now or you mostly work with now? I think like what would you imagining now as a current architect?
So So I don't think this is a style, but I am interested in trauma-based design, trauma-informative design. So this again goes back to like services, right? And talking to people like yourself who are,
Mm-hmm.
who are either social workers or are on the ground working with people. And I think there's a gap currently in the industry where maybe because we're romanticizing what our styles, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're just based on an aesthetic as opposed to a mission. So
Right.
maybe that has to be thought out or revisited, And but I think there has to be an informative, not only trauma, but an informative design based style where you're creating a style that is going to serve a community, whether that's trauma, whether that's to celebrate or to cherish.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And then she wants to know any paranormal experiences throughout your site visit, building visits.
uh, that's a good one. No, I don't think I've seen anything,
Okay.
but I
Heard.
think or heard. I think I'm always just scared.
Yeah, me too. I'm scared.
I think when we first logged in, you said I hear the sound. Maybe it's just a ghost, but we do joke. My partner and I, our house, the house where we live, creaks a lot, and sometimes a light one time's turned on by itself. So we always joke that we have a ghost roommate.
Right, right. Okay. Well, let us know if anything comes up in your future. Okay, so any shout outs you want to do or any projects you're going to do, and maybe if you want if people are interested in following you, where they could find you.
Yeah, I think if you're someone who is interested in having a conversation about architecture, or are someone who's young or not even young, someone who's interested in applying to architecture school, don't hesitate to reach out on Instagram, right? I'm at Hood Architect. And even if it is private, just send a request and a DM. I promise I'll get to it at some point. How you can find me. So I sit on the National Organization of Minority Architects Southern California Chapter Board. So NOMA, you can find me there too. This summer, we will have our summer camp at ELAC in person.
Oh, nice.
If you have a young person in your household from the ages 10 to 17 who are interested in participating, also don't hesitate to reach out. I'll help you through the registration process. Shout out to Los Angeles Community Action Network, who do a lot of the housing justice work on the ground. So if there's someone you are looking to support or volunteer with on a weekend, and whether it's serving a meal or entering an activity with women or other people who are experiencing homelessness or houselessness, they are the group to support. Let's see who else. Yeah, I think that's it.
Okay. And everybody else, if you want to follow the podcast, it's on Instagram, Beyond the Facade Podcast, or my personal page on Swami_Chronicles, and Sabrina's Observing Spooks and Other Vices. And thank you again for your time. I think when people talk to you, they have a lot to ask, and they're long podcasts, but hey, there's a lot to talk about, right?
They are long, yeah. Yeah, they're long, and I hope they're not boring.
No.
Honestly, I think, we need to have these conversations sometimes because they're not necessarily about architecture. Sometimes they're about being a woman in the industry, right? That is challenging, or sometimes just being a minority, and experiencing a lot of harassment. And trust me, I have had a lot of that. And I think something I have said is just I've experienced hood trauma, but there's nothing like white inflicted trauma in the workplace.
Oh man, yeah. Well, yeah. So definitely thank you again for your time, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye.
Thank you.